The nightly news from NBC, and we'll see you at 11.
This is NBC Nightly News with John Chancellor in New York.
Good evening. As dignitaries from all over the world headed for Egypt and the funeral of President Anwar Sadat, the government of Egypt today assured them they'd be safe. Worries about security are keeping President Reagan and American congressional leaders at home. But a delegation of 3 former American presidents will be on its way tonight. And there was trouble in Egypt today between Muslim extremists and police. One extremist and some policemen died. More from Tom Brokaw in Cairo.
Egyptian television is reporting tonight that there was a shootout between Muslim fundamentalists and local police in the southern town of Asyut earlier today. According to Egyptian television, which almost always reflects the government line, 2 carloads of Muslim gunmen pulled up in front of the local police station and opened fire. Several policemen and at least one of the attackers reportedly were killed. Now, before these details were publicly available, Egyptian officials were saying this evening that everything is under control, that every Egyptian town is safe. At a government press briefing tonight, Dr. Osama El-Baz called today's shooting a minor incident. El-Baz, a close friend of Vice President Mubarak, insisted security will not be a problem during Saturday's funeral.
The situation here is under control. The fact that an incident took place does not mean that the situation is unsafe or that the security is not tight enough. This is not a police state. It will remain to be a free country, and we intend to take all measures to protect our guests without turning it into a police state.
Egypt's defense minister, General Abu Ghazala, says he's investigating the army to see if it contains any more Islamic fanatics, because it turns out the officer who led the assassination belonged to an organization of Islamic fundamentalists.
He's a fanatic, but we didn't know about that for the last 5-6 months. But he was a good officer. He was doing his job very well, and you can never know. Sometimes you discover that he's a fanatic. What could you do?
And despite official assurances of order, President Sadat's funeral procession Saturday will be shorter for security reasons. Protection has been tightened at the burial site, which coincidentally is not far from where President Sadat was killed. Airport security increased today in anticipation of tomorrow's arrival of foreign leaders attending the funeral. While Egyptian officials claim they can control Islamic fanatics, there is growing evidence that won't be an easy job. As Jim Compton reports tonight, Islamic fundamentalism is spreading rapidly throughout Egypt and the Middle East.
Intense fundamentalist Islam is not a movement confined to a few outside the mainstream of Egyptian life. It is a powerful and growing movement among lower and middle-class Egyptians, particularly in Cairo. It calls for a revival of Egyptian society based on Muslim faith. Though there is no direct connection, militant Muslims everywhere gained much of their inspiration and confidence from the revolution in Iran. There have been other dramatic demonstrations of the revivalist sentiment and rejection of Western values sweeping Islam. The most stunning, the seizure of the Grand Mosque in Mecca, Saudi Arabia in 1979. And there may be a spiritual thread linking that reformist uprising with the fall of the Shah, with violent incidents all across the Arab world, and now with the death of Anwar Sadat. Anwar Sadat's Islamic piety was never in doubt. He prayed publicly, constantly. Sadat was determined to avoid any comparison with the Shah of Iran. But like the Shah, he tried to ignore the surge of Islamic fundamentalism. And it worked for about 2 years. But with religious demonstrations growing in size and intensity, Sadat was under pressure to demonstrate, particularly to the Israelis, that he was in control in Egypt. In the end, it may have been Sadat's determination to stop the growth of radical political Islam that galvanized the resolve of the small religious sect that eventually took his life. James Compton, NBC News, Cairo.
There was a curious combination of mourning and celebration in Cairo today. A Muslim feast day, the beginning of the annual pilgrimage to Mecca. Traditionally, it is one of the most joyous days on the Islamic calendar, but this year it is tempered by the death of President Sadat. A report on all of this now from Jim Bitterman.
In Egypt, it is the Muslim holiday of Bayram, the biggest, most joyful feast day in the Islamic year. The mosques were packed for special prayers. At Sayyida Zainab Mosque in the heart of Cairo, there were so many worshipers that they spilled over into the streets. Traffic had to be redirected around the faithful. Among the devout, Abdul Amir Hilal and his 2 sons. After prayers, they went straight home. The government directed that with the situation here fragile, religious celebrations should be confined to the mosques. On this day last year, the streets were filled with firecracker-tossing merrymakers. But in Hilal's neighborhood, most were celebrating this year as he did, quietly at home. God willed that Sadat's life was over, says Hilal, but it was foolish, stupid people who killed him. He does not know what will happen to Egypt now. The family laughed and talked little. Instead, the sounds echoing through their small apartment and in the side streets of Cairo this holiday were those of somber verses chanted from the Quran and broadcast everywhere on radio and television because of Sadat's death. Jim Bitterman, NBC News, Cairo.
All of this concern about security in Egypt will be even greater beginning tomorrow afternoon when the foreign leaders begin to arrive. The United States delegation, headed by Secretary of State Alexander Haig and former Presidents Nixon, Ford, and Carter, due here mid-afternoon. We'll be back with more from Cairo later in the program.
Americans wounded in Tuesday's shooting were flown to West Germany today. Among those taken to an American military hospital were Marine Major Gerald Agenbrod, Air Force Captain Christopher Ryan, and an American businessman named Richard McCluskey. All suffered wounds, but their condition is described as good. As Tom Brokaw reported, questions are still being asked in Cairo about the security arrangements on the day of the assassination. There is general agreement that it was shockingly lax, but no one knows why. The Associated Press reports that photographers at the scene say some security men turned their guns on the cameramen when the shooting started and ordered that no pictures be taken.
Here's how I talked my husband into Buick's little limousine. First, I pointed out how elegant it looked. I mean, just look at it. Then I showed him how cushiony and comfortable it feels inside. And I said, just consider how economical the Regal is to drive. I was very convincing. The only problem is, now that I've talked him into it, I can't seem to talk him out of it.
Hi.
Hi.
Wouldn't you really rather have a Buick?
President Reagan met today with the Egyptian ambassador to the United States to talk about the new situation in Egypt and issued an invitation to the man who will take President Sadat's place. John Palmer has more on that.
During a somber meeting in the Oval Office with Egyptian Ambassador Gorbal today, President Reagan extended an invitation to Hosni Mubarak, Egypt's president-designate, to pay a state visit to Washington early next year. Mr. Reagan said thinking about the assassination of Sadat still affects him.
And then just depression settles on me. You get busy and doing something, and then that comes back to your mind again. What a tragedy, and how useless and how senseless.
Mr. Reagan invited Gorbal to fly to Cairo tonight with the U.S. delegation attending the Sadat funeral. Earlier, after meeting with the president, Republican Senator Nancy Kassebaum told reporters Sadat's murder had prompted her to change her position from undecided to favoring the sale of AWACS radar planes to Saudi Arabia.
I think the assassination of President Sadat makes it crucial that we reach out to all moderates in the Arab world. The sale now, more than ever, is in the interest of Mideast stability and American security.
The White House said the president now believes the momentum is running in his direction for approval of the AWACS sale. Although the administration concedes it will need about 24 additional senators to switch if the AWACS sale is to go through. John Palmer, NBC News at the White House.
More congressional opposition today to the president's plan to build B-1 bombers. Democrat Joseph Addabbo, an influential member of the House Appropriations Committee, said there is simply not enough money, in his view, to build both the B-1 and the advanced technology bomber called Stealth. Addabbo wants the B-1 program scrapped. President Reagan today approved the construction of a 56-mile-long, extremely low-frequency antenna and transmitter in Upper Michigan, part of a system called ELF of communication with Navy submarines. Earlier plans for a much larger system had been bitterly opposed by local residents. The Washington Post is in the news today. Former President Carter is going to sue the Post because of an item in its ear gossip column. More from Don Porter.
During the change of administrations last January, there were newspaper reports later denied that Nancy Reagan wished the Carters would move out of the White House early so the incoming First Lady could start redecorating. Last Monday, the Washington Post printed a gossip item about why the Carters were so sure Mrs. Reagan wanted them out. It read, "They're saying that Blair House, where Nancy was lodging, was bugged, and at least one tattler in the Carter tribe has described listening in to the tape itself." The former president is described as upset and plans to sue the Post for printing what Carter lawyers call irresponsible falsehoods published with malice. In Washington today, former Carter Press Secretary Jody Powell said it is no small matter to have a former president accused of bugging his successor.
Not only is the president and Mrs. Carter damaged by this, but also damages the reputation of the United States government, because the clear implication of that article is that Blair House, which is the official residence for all visiting heads of state and government, is bugged by the American government. That is absolutely not the case.
Powell said that even if the Post prints a full retraction, Mr. Carter may ask damages in 7 figures. So far, no comment from the Washington Post, and the Reagan White House says it has no knowledge of any bugging at Blair House. White House.
Tonight, more of these people will count on Sominex than any other sleep aid. At times like these, Sominex helps you feel drowsy, so you get to sleep in minutes. Next time sleep escapes you, trust Sominex to help you sleep. Medically tested Sominex. It's simply faster.
Let's talk about prices and let's talk about interest rates. The average buyer, I need to tell this group, has literally been jolted by the so-called, one of you guys coined it, I guess, sticker shock when he walks into a new car showroom. We're going to try today to declare war on sticker shock. We will hold the price line on Omni and Horizon Miser and custom models, and we will hold the line on the base prices of all of our low-end Aries Reliant 2-door and 4-door models. We're really proud of the new products we're bringing out.
President Reagan today announced a new policy for nuclear power designed to produce more of it. He called for speeding up the licensing of new plants. He lifted the ban on reprocessing reactor fuel. He ordered the completion of the Clinch River breeder reactor in Tennessee, which had been opposed by President Carter. The Reagan administration hopes to license 33 new nuclear plants in the next 2 years. The president's announcement drew immediate criticism from groups opposed to nuclear power. Bobby Unser won the Indianapolis 500 last May. Then, on the next day, he lost it to Mario Andretti on a penalty. And today, he won it again. Bob Jamieson tells how that happened.
It took officials 137 days to confirm the checkered flag and declare Bobby Unser the official winner of last spring's Indy 500. Though Unser finished 8 seconds ahead of Mario Andretti, Unser had passed several cars during a yellow caution flag, dropped after a crash 3/4 of the way through the race. Unser was penalized 1 lap for ignoring the caution order and dropped to 2nd place in the final standings. But Unser appealed the ruling to the U.S. Auto Club, which governs the Indianapolis race. A special 3-member panel today ruled that the penalty was too severe.
They feel as though that there was a violation. There's no question about that. I think that the majority of the appeal panel felt as though that the penalty should have been called during the race.
Though Unser was fined $40,000 of the $242,000 first prize money, Andretti was left with these pictures from what he thought last spring was the winner's circle, and 2nd place money, $169,000.
I lost a lot of faith in human nature, in a sense, in the integrity of our sport as to how it's judged by our own people, really.
Unser was elk hunting today in New Mexico. Reached by two-way radio, he didn't criticize the long wait. He said simply that he was delighted to become the 6th 3-time winner of the Indy 500, even 4.5 months after the checkered flag. Bob Jamieson, NBC News, New York.
Those famous Sears catalogs with eye-catching offers of everything from Apple cores to underwear may soon be displaying something new, stocks and bonds. Sears is acquiring a brokerage house, Dean Witter Reynolds. That story from our business correspondent, Mike Jensen.
Sears Roebuck, the nation's largest retailer, said it was acquiring Dean Witter Reynolds, the nation's 5th largest brokerage house, for $607 million. Dean Witter directors, after meeting all afternoon on the 29th floor of this building near Wall Street, announced that they had accepted Sears' offer. It would be a friendly takeover. Sears is best known for its chain of 859 retail stores across the country and for its catalog business, but it's in the midst of a major diversification program. Earlier this week, Sears announced that it was buying Coldwell Banker & Company, the country's largest real estate brokerage company, for more than $175 million. Sears already owns Allstate Insurance, one of its most profitable operations, and Sears has announced that it's seeking government permission to sell a money market fund. Sears says it intends to become the largest financial services company in the country. Acquisition of Dean Witter Reynolds would raise the prospect of a whole boutique of financial services available under one roof. A Sears customer would be able to buy insurance, real estate, both residential and commercial, stocks and bonds, and shares of a money fund. Sears has had profit problems in recent years with its traditional retail business, although lately it's been doing better. It failed in attempts to out-discount the discount stores, so now it's trying another approach. Mike Jensen, NBC News, New York.
Chase Manhattan, the country's 3rd largest bank, lowered its prime lending rate today 0.5 point to 18.5%. That is the 2nd drop in the prime rate this week.
This is California wine country, where many of America's finest wines are born. The wine country isn't far from San Francisco. So naturally, San Franciscans really know their wines. And the white wine they drink most is Almaden Mountain Chablis. In fact, they buy more Almaden Mountain Chablis than Taylor, California Cellars and Inglenook Naval Chablis combined. Why? Pour yourself a glass of Almaden Mountain Chablis. You'll find out.
Who needs Dr. Scholl's air pillow insoles?
You do if you work with your feet.
I walk all day long. Without Dr. Scholl's air pillow insoles, I quit.
I hardly take a step, but I couldn't do this without my air pillow insoles.
Thin enough to slip comfortably into your shoes. And heavenly soft to cushion every step all day long. Who needs Dr. Scholl's air pillow insoles?
Just about anybody who hasn't got them.
The long Congress of the Solidarity Organization in Poland is over. It was a meeting the authorities wanted to stop, but the workers went ahead and held it anyway. Now that it's over, Solidarity has become the well-organized opposition to Poland's Communist Party leadership. Its influence is nationwide, as we see in this report from John Cochran.
While the Solidarity Congress debated for 12 days, the fishermen of Gdansk worked and waited to see what their union would do for them. Fishermen, like millions of Poles, look to Solidarity to solve their problems. The problem for fishermen is polluted water, which has greatly reduced their catch. And the Solidarity Congress did vote for an environmental cleanup campaign. But like so many union resolutions, this one means nothing unless the communist authorities act on it. On shore at the Gdansk shipyard, where Solidarity was born, workers also waited to see whether the Congress would accept an offer from the Communist Party, a compromise that would give both the union and the party a voice in running Polish industry. The delegates accepted the compromise, a victory for moderates like Lech Wałęsa, who won re-election as the union's leader. But Wałęsa also got a mandate for radical reforms. The delegates demanded that the government put an end to price increases on consumer goods and that it put on trial former communist officials accused of incompetence and corruption. Poles have no illusions that the reforms called for by Solidarity will make the coming months any easier. This winter, Poland will be short of both food and fuel. Tempers will be short, too. And that means the danger of confrontation with the communist authorities will persist. John Cochran, NBC News, Gdansk.
NASA said today it will try to launch the space shuttle on November the 4th. The launch had been scheduled for tomorrow, but a fuel spill forced a delay.
Now,
You can shop with money in your checking account and never write the check. MasterCard, too. It looks almost like the MasterCard card. It's accepted like the credit card around the world and goes through the imprinter the same way. But what you spend is paid from your personal checking account. No bills, no interest. That's it. It looks like a credit card, but MasterCard, too, works like a check. Carry both. You'll want the two, too.
More now from Egypt. There are many who believe that President Sadat's recent crackdown on his religious and political opponents, he put 1,600 in jail, had something to do with his assassination. Tom Brokaw has more on all this from Cairo.
Before he was killed, President Sadat also cracked down on the leader of Egypt's Coptic Christians, a religious minority that has been here for almost 2,000 years. Ironically, a bishop for the Coptic Christians was also killed in the attack on President Sadat, and that has triggered concerns among Egypt's Coptic community. A report from Paul Miller.
The Coptic Church buried Bishop Samuel today, a bishop loyal to Sadat even after he banished the Coptic Pope. Sadat was afraid Pope Shenouda was stirring up anti-government fervor, just as the Islamic fundamentalists were. The Coptic church leaders want the Egyptian government to give them more, but they especially want more protection. They are afraid of the consequences of Muslim extremism. For that reason, they are supporting Sadat's designated successor and urging their church members to back the government. The Copts know that Sadat tried to be even-handed in his dealings with the Copts and Muslims, and that Muslim fanatics are blamed for the deaths of their bishop and their president. Paul Miller, NBC News, Cairo.
The men who killed President Sadat were able to fire so many shots and get so close to him that there remain many questions about what happened to security that day. In Cairo today, Egypt's Defense Minister, General Abu Ghazala, told me that his military policemen at the site were not issued bullets, and that the president's security forces were more concerned about the crowds behind the reviewing stand. General Ghazala was sitting right next to President Sadat when the shooting began.
When the truck stopped, I thought that there is some malfunction in the truck itself, because the officer opened the door. I didn't know that he was an officer, but a military man, and then he stepped out, and when he did throw the grenade, I knew that there is something to happen. So I moved in front of the president, and I tried to ask him to take cover. He stood up, and then the firing and the shooting. Of course, I was not happy.
You saw the gunman at close range?
I saw him at about 2 yards.
Pointing the gun directly at you?
Yes.
Did you think you were dead?
Of course, and wouldn't you?
Did President Sadat say anything at all in those final moments?
No, no. Because of the firing, I didn't hear. Maybe he said, but I didn't hear him saying anything at all.
Did you know that he was mortally wounded as soon as you saw him?
No, because I heard his voice after we took cover, but I didn't exactly, know the words, because there was a lot of noise, a lot of people, a lot of things coming over our heads, the bullets, everything. That was the situation.
General Ghazala also said he is convinced there won't be any more attacks from within Egypt's army. The army he said he is worried about is the one controlled by Libya's Colonel Gaddafi.
And finally this evening, a quartet of American presidents, 3 former presidents traveling to Washington to visit the present occupant of the White House, then flying off to Cairo for Sadat's funeral. That kind of meeting has not happened in modern times. More from John Danson.
Jimmy Carter left his home in Plains, Georgia at mid-afternoon to begin the solemn journey to Cairo. A journey remarkable because it will bring together in one delegation 3 former presidents of the United States, Carter, Ford, and Richard Nixon, who left his home in New Jersey in late afternoon. They are flying together from Washington to pay homage to Anwar Sadat, a man whose presidency touched each of them and helped shape their time in the White House. By early evening, the 3 former presidents were arriving at Andrews Air Force Base outside Washington. Ford from California, Nixon from New Jersey, Carter from Georgia. A historic gathering on the windswept tarmac. Later, they would fly to Cairo together aboard the president's plane. But this time, it would be Secretary of State Haig, the senior official present, who would occupy the front cabin, which had once been theirs. They would sit together in the second cabin, Carter next to Nixon, Ford across the way. 3 former presidents of the United States discussing what? Before leaving, all 3 flew off to the White House for a courtesy call on President Reagan. The first time in modern history 4 presidents had gathered under the White House roof. Mr. Reagan will not attend the funeral. U.S. security agencies say it's too risky. The trip to Sadat's funeral will be a quick one. The delegation returns to Washington late Saturday night. John Dancy, NBC News, Washington.
And that's nightly news for this evening. Incidentally, Roger Mudd has been on vacation, and he'll be back next week. We'll be back tomorrow. Until then, good night for NBC News.
Tomorrow morning on Today, Tom Brokaw in Cairo talks to a survivor of Tuesday's reviewing stand massacre. Jane Pauley talks to novelist Kurt Vonnegut about writers' complaints in this country.